It used to be people would stay at one workplace for decades.
Mm-hmm.
We're hoping they'll stay for 18 months now, right?
But why is that? Do you know why?
Most people think they are self-aware. Only 10 to 15% actually fit the criteria.
Why do people have a hard time learning from history?
Because we're human. Right. And one woman at the end, she said, "You've taught us how to ask questions. I want to know how to answer questions." And it's like, I can't tell you that because that is the question of leadership.
Why is respect so hard to understand?
I think because people think that the way that I think about respect is the way that everyone thinks about respect.
Get ready to be inspired on today's podcast with Dr. Julie Pham, founder and CEO of LeaderSeat based in Seattle. An Amazon bestselling author with the book titled 7 Forms of Respect, Dr. Pham has been honored for her community leadership and expertise in building collaborative teams. Born in Vietnam and raised in Seattle, she holds a PhD from Cambridge University, is a magna cum laude graduate from UC Berkeley, and earned her real-life MBA navigating her family's newspaper through the Great Recession. Dr. Pham, thank you so much for joining me.
Nima, thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course. So I want to actually talk about the most recent thing that just happened to us on LinkedIn. You did a TED Talk.
Yes, I had a TEDx talk. They're very picky about not calling, the difference between TEDx and TED. So I had a TEDx talk. Yes.
And how was that experience? Walk us through that.
Oh my gosh, it was. I've never worked so hard on 1,800 words, and I can tell you that it was truly a transformational experience because there was so much refinement that went into it. And Nima, I'm also a feedback hound. I love to get feedback and involve people in the process. And I think that there sometimes is the big thing I learned through all this process was having to trust myself because there were so many voices I was getting, so many people. And one thing is true, different people see the same thing differently.
Yep.
So, and I really had to just kind of in the end, just say, thank you. I'm doing it this way. And I appreciate your feedback. And it was a really fascinating journey in trusting myself.
So you doing it your way, you think you succeeded more than if you were going to do it other people's ways.
Well, but the thing is, I got a lot of feedback and I incorporated a lot of feedback, but there was no way I was going to satisfy everyone's critiques.
Yeah.
Right. Because sometimes they were conflicting. And so what I really learned was actually how to articulate the things that were important to me. I'll give you 2 examples. One person actually wanted me. So my talk was curiosity as a practice. And someone really pushed me on quoting someone else on curiosity. I think you should quote Ben Franklin or something. And she even sent me a link to all these quotes I could use. And I said, no, I really want to use my own words. I don't think I need to quote someone else here. And I even asked her, why do you think it's necessary for me to quote someone else instead of using my own words? Right. So that was one big lesson of just knowing, no, I believe in my credibility. I think it's something if we think someone expressed something so eloquently that we were inspired by that. And it's another thing to feel like I need someone else's credibility. And so to really believe, no, I know this too. And that's another thing actually is just the pulling in evidence. There was someone who was just, I think you need to make it more sciencey. And so Nima, I started looking up articles in Harvard Business Review to kind of, is there evidence to justify what I already think? And then one of my coaches said, no, you have expertise. You've done all this work. You don't need to quote someone or cite some other third-party researcher, get some stats on this to prove that because even if I didn't have my own focus groups and workshops, even just lived experience is something. And I think we discredit that a lot. And so that's where in this journey, it was just, yes, I have faith in my message and how I want to deliver that. So yeah, it was a transformational experience.
I think I love the message that you have behind this. Like we often either fear getting feedback from other people because either we are like, I don't need to know what other people think. I'm going to do what I want to do, or we get their feedback and do it. Where do you find that draw that line of like taking what people are saying, be able to put ourselves in other people's shoes and be like, I see where you're coming from, and be able to make that fine line of it, personalizing it to us?
So first of all, I probably got about feedback from about 75 people.
Wow.
And 20 of them had looked at multiple drafts, multiple versions. So I knew
Wow.
that there was no way I was going to make everyone happy. So there's
Yeah.
that, right? And actually, sometimes someone's feedback can point to why no, it can actually help me clarify this is why I'm doing something. So I think it's their feedback can actually force me to ask questions I hadn't asked before. So I'll give you another example. 6 days before my talk, 6 days, one of my coaches wanted me to change this key part in the speech and move it earlier and move it to the first third. And I was like, I don't know about that. She was like, in my professional opinion, I think you should do this. And I really have to think about that. And I wasn't afraid of the work. That's not what I was afraid of. I thought about it, and I realized that that particular part was the climax of the talk. And I realized, I think oftentimes in storytelling, the climax comes later. You don't have it in the first third. And I actually started to look it up, and she's like, I think that this is the climax. And then I looked up all this research on, yes, there's the rising action and the climax and the falling action. You have to build tension to that point. And so because she really pushed me, and I just felt, I don't want to do this. And then I found out why. Right? I was like, oh no. And then later on, the next day, because she wanted to meet again, and I actually recorded it with the way it was. And she was like, you're right. Leave it where it is. And I think what she was really reacting to was I hadn't mastered telling the first third. And so she thought maybe if you just move it earlier, it'll be better. So, but kind of balancing that tension is really listening for what they're asking for. And then seeing, does that fit my vision? Am I resistant because I just don't want to do the work? Or am I resistant because where's that resistance from? So usually I'm like, okay, if it's not because I'm willing to try things, I'm willing to put in the work. And it's just, oh, but no, that isn't working out. And that was actually, the same process actually when I wrote my book, 7 Forms of Respect too. And I can tell you about that. But this though was, I had 10 weeks. I opened up myself to rehearsal sessions where people could just sign up and watch me. And then I would give them a survey.
Oh, you were dedicated.
I was dedicated. I would give them a survey because I wanted them to put in their input before they heard other people's, because that changes.
Yeah.
Too, right? And I was so fascinated by different people's interpretation of the same content. Because I had some people were just, this is horrible. And the thing is, it's so easy to focus on the negative feedback. Right. I could have like 10 people are like, this is amazing, and be very specific about why. But then it's the 11th person. I'm like, I have to fix it. But then I have to really think, going back to, I have to trust myself. And that has been a real journey. And in terms of, I don't want to put off feedback because it's going to come one way or another. So I rather get it earlier than after the talk. Right?
Exactly. And it's funny you say the different people's perspective, because we'll get to this later. But how respect is get, like, you understand the definition of respect. It's very different personalities. We'll get to that one later. But before we get to all of that, can you tell our audience about your current role as CEO of Curiosity Based and what services you exactly provide through that company?
Yes. Yeah. So I founded Curiosity Based in January 2021. And we're a small, scrappy team, and we help organizations practice curiosity in the world, starting in the workplace. And I say starting in the workplace because that is where we spend most of our waking hours. So how we feel about work is going to affect every other part of our life, right? You feel bad at work, you know what? Your spouse is going to hear it. Your family is going to hear it. And so we have these different, the easiest way to think about it is modules. So 7 forms of respect is around organizational culture. We have goal setting, communication skills, and belonging and inclusion. And we deliver most of this content through live workshops, whether they're in person or remote. We do actually excellent Zoom work. We also have digital courses and the book. I think the easiest way to think about it is one day I dream that Curiosity Base will be like Franklin Covey, where we will have our content and train the trainer and be able to license it. Nima, I just want to share one of the reasons why I started the company was because I saw that I was doing a lot of work around diversity and leadership. I was doing in my previous role, I was doing a lot of work around that. And yet what I realized was a lot of those conversations around diversity in the workplace are about recruitment and retention and representation. And yet most management and leadership books are written by white men. And the ones that are influential, or the ones that we recommend, the ones that are on those top ranked lists, right? And the analogy I like to use is that of theater. We are changing the actors and they're reading the same leadership scripts. And so I wanted to enlarge, I want to contribute to, as a woman of color author writing about communication and organizational culture, I wanted to show, hey, we can widen the pool and have a mindset of abundance. It's not about scarcity. It's just we can have more perspectives. And so there's me as an individual author contributing to that. And also Curiosity Base, we do a lot of work to help promote other authors as well.
Okay. It's funny. There's a lot of companies that corporations hire to bring in to teach their employees or their leaders on how to behave, how to talk, how to increase curiosity. Do you think leaders nowadays are lacking those things that are in these positions? That's why they're going and bringing in third parties to come speak to their leaders about this? And if so, then how is someone labeled a leader if they're not able to portray the things that you're teaching already to their team? Why do they need someone else to teach a leader mentality if they are already in that position?
Well, so I think that the skills that you need to climb in a role are different from when you get in that role, right? Because think about listening, right? So the listening muscle is not very obvious. It's the talking muscle that's more obvious, right? So it's not apparent to people. And yet we just say, oh, listening is a really good leadership skill. And so, and because of positional power, people might think, oh, I'm doing a really good job, but that's because of positional power. And so they actually, I think, lose self-awareness. And this is the thing, I think of curiosity as a practice. We have to keep doing it again and again. It's not like we're there. I constantly have to practice it myself. There are times where I am not curious, right? And so we have to constantly work on those skills. And there's a stat, it's something like, I think it's something like 80% of leaders think and executives think that curiosity is practiced at work, and only 50% of individual contributors agree. All right. And 70% of individual contributors say that there are barriers to asking questions at work. And then here's my favorite one around self-awareness. Most people think they are self-aware. Only 10 to 15% actually fit the criteria. So, that I think all of these, and this kind of gets at, we think of curiosity as a practice. It's something we have to keep practicing and doing. And we like it. And I actually liken it to meditation. It looks easy, yet it's really hard.
I noticed that on your website you mentioned.
Yeah, right. And it comes down to self-awareness, relationship building, and clear communication. And all of those are things we have to keep practicing and trying.
I feel like one can get curious and practice curiosity when you're given the freedom of being able to give pushback, especially to your leadership, like having a conversation, having a different viewpoint of your leaders. What have you seen in regards to your experience? And are you trying to train workers to be able to push back on their leaders, maybe way of thinking, or maybe they portray something or say something that they have that freedom to be able to say what they think as an employee, rather than be like, oh, that's my employer, I have to listen to what they're saying.
Right. And so actually, to answer an earlier question you asked, why bring in an outside consultant? It's because so then that the leaders can also learn too.
Yeah.
right? Because it can also be what they're supposed to lead the organization and teach. Sometimes they actually can model curiosity by saying, I have a student mindset as well.
Yeah.
And that's why I brought in someone else so I can be equal level with all of you as we are learning together. And so what we do is it's not so much about teaching people to push back. It's actually helping people actually identify their blind spots. So one of the things we like to do is help people understand what is their listening style, what is their inquiry style, what kinds of questions do we ask, and then also what's holding us back from asking questions. Because how often have you heard leaders say, "Oh, just ask me anything. There's no stupid question," yet they aren't willing to ask questions. They're not modeling it. And so so part of it is helping leaders understand how they can model it. And also helping people sometimes there's this defensiveness or fear around asking questions because we will have a whole dialogue. If I ask this, then they're going to feel this, and then they're going to say this, and then I'm going to say this. And we've had this whole dialogue in our mind that's like, I'm not going to ask.
Yeah.
Right.
And you just go talk to your coworker about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so one of the things we actually teach is you can decline a question. You can decline a question. You could say, I had to think about that some more, or I'm not really comfortable answering that right now. And also the person asking shouldn't feel, oh my gosh, I'm a horrible person because I asked that question. That person can decline. You can ask, they can decline. I think what I'm actually seeing in a lot of workplaces, there's such a fear of being wrong and of offending someone, because that's usually it. It's usually like, I don't want to offend someone. And what if they're offended by this question? Or what if they think like I wasn't listening, or I wasn't, or what if they think I'm incompetent, or what if they think I'm being passive? So there are all these different reasons why we don't ask questions. And so we try to actually understand what that is and understand that there are certain things that are making them resist asking questions.
So you have a PhD in history, which I thought was very interesting. There's always two sides of story when it comes to history, right? I feel like when a piece of history is told back, it's always given back to us from someone's perspective rather than an objective perspective, unless you read it from a book. That's the only way I feel like you can get it in an objective way. Have you ever, or do you use the approach of recommending teams to read certain types of books to help them with their team building and curiosity?
So, I mean, aside from my book, but no,
Yes.
no, actually, I like to have the content come from the people themselves, because everyone's got their own stories. Everyone's got their own stories. And so sometimes I'll just, hey, here's a story. And then how did the people in this group interpret that story? And so in general, I mean, there are lots of books that I recommend. And yet, Nima, I think asking any group to do homework is a very, very vulnerable thing, right? Because what ends up happening is some people don't have time to do the homework. And then the people who did the homework resent the people who didn't do the homework. And then that resentment prevents any of the other learning. And I actually think a lot of the content we can just learn from one another. So we think of ourselves as just these facilitators and guiding people to learn and get curious about one another. The content is actually within the group.
So in 2008, you were running your parents' Vietnamese newspaper business. That was during the recession. You've spoken about the real life MBA in the intro. I mentioned that you used that terminology before. What was your goal when you decided to help with that business? Were you planning on staying in that business for long term, or was it?
No, I mean, there were personal and professional reasons. So I realized as I was finishing up my dissertation, I didn't want to stay in academia. And many reasons for why I didn't want to stay in academia. And I wanted to do something much more dynamic. And I thought, okay, I want to do business. So my younger brother was working at the newspaper, and he said, can you come back? Can you help out? We really could use some help. And so, the personal reasons were I thought, most people don't get to spend time with their parents as adults. Right. And I thought, if I spend some time in the family business, and I thought maybe at the time it'd be a year, right? If I spend like a year working in the family business, I will never regret not having time with them, because I know that working in a family business is intense. I mean, I grew up with it. And this would be as an adult. So those were personal reasons, and I'm really so glad that I did that. And then the other thing was I just spent all of my 20s in school. I was not going to go for an MBA. Right? I wasn't going to go right. I was not going to go back for formal training, and I just thought, I think I can learn a lot by being here, and I just learned so much more than I could even possibly have imagined. So that was but I didn't think it would be for long. It was,
Yeah.
and I stayed for 3 years, so it actually ended up being longer than I thought I would be there.
So you said you've learned a lot, which I'm sure you learned a ton. So nowadays in this age, newsletters have become very popular. I feel like that's the version of the newspaper back in the day. Would you say there are any valuable advice you can give to someone starting a newsletter or or is running a newspaper like totally different from doing a newsletter?
Mhm. I will say one of the sad things, one of the really valuable things about a newspaper that we can't get in, that we can't get through the internet is it's curated, and you encounter news that you would not have chosen on your own. Right. And so it's like you pick up a newspaper and someone's deciding, hey, this is what I think general consumption people should read. And yet now, even with the newsletters, they're very much like, okay, they clicked on this, so I should give them more of this. Right. Or like we go on and anything that we Google, they're just giving us more of that thing. And so it's much harder actually to learn new things. So I think in terms of writing a newsletter, so I have my weekly newsletter, is to think about what's your point of view. And so for me, it's this mix of, here, let me give you tips on relationship building, professionally and personally, on curiosity, on interesting stats. I'm also going to share with you my founder story. It's, one of the things we've found is people they click on stories about the people in my company. And that's been interesting. Like when we do, oh, here's what we did on vacation, people click on that. So I think just being authentic, being real. We never use stock photos.
Yeah.
So,
so the phrase "history repeats itself." That phrase was coined by George Santayana. He's a writer philosopher, and he said, "Those who cannot remember the past are recommended to repeat it." Why do you think it's hard at times for some people to learn from history and mistakes? For example,
keep
go
going.
ahead. For example, like how do you deal with customers, patients, coworkers? We all know how to speak to people and how to communicate with people properly, right? Especially with patients like I'm a pharmacist, and we know how to approach patients and talk to them properly. And we know if we raise our voice or if we just give them a little attitude, then things can go left field. Why do people have a hard time learning from history?
Because we're human. Right.
I guess
because
that's
we're right, because we're human. Those things are going to happen, right? I woke up, I'm in a cranky mood, my back hurts today, I'm going to be crankier than usual, right? There's going to be times where, oh wow, it's sunny and I love that, or I don't like the sun and I'm cranky. So, and I actually really don't like the phrase, like learning these lessons that we learned from history. Especially one of my specialty areas was the Vietnam War, and we often hear, what are the lessons of the Vietnam War? And the reason why I don't like that is because I feel like there's an assumption that we can prevent bad things from happening. And we cannot prevent bad things from happening because human nature, right? And because in a lot of times we don't even know it's bad until after. Because when we're in it, we're just in it. And both sides are just thinking we are fighting for what we think is right. And it's only after that that's when history judges. And so I think it's more of how do we be open and to learn from different perspectives. And so I think a lot of my history training, I think of history as sitting at this intersection of these two disciplines of social science and humanities. And so as a social scientist, I search for truth because I believe there's such a thing. Humanities, everything is a story. There is no such thing as truth. And history as a discipline sits right at that intersection.
That's why it's so confusing.
But I think it's also so human, right? And that's like, there's so much ambiguity. There is no truth. And I think that this is there are some people who are frustrated with my book because it's just like, it's too fluid. Anything could be true. It's like, because anything can be true, right?
But
Because
everything
things
has a truth.
change.
Everything
Yeah.
is, everything
Yeah.
technically
Because there are
is
multiple
true.
truths. It's
Yeah.
multiple, because the thing is, multiple truths are coexisting. And also what is true for me today could be different tomorrow. And I think that the big
So
thing
true.
is, how do we actually let ourselves change? Because sometimes the biggest uh, challenge blocker is us. This is the way I see myself. I can't say that because this is the way I see myself. And yet, another way to think about that is like, I would actually say, can we surprise ourselves? Can we actually still change? A friend just told me that her estranged sister, she's 80, her sister's 85, and her 85-year-old sister, after decades of not talking to each other, is changing. We can still change if we believe we can.
But why do, again, I feel like I already know your answer. We're humans. I get it. But why is it so hard for humans to understand logic? Like,
It's,
I feel like we have a hard time of understanding right from wrong. And like history, there's different perspectives, right? But there is one truth. We know there's only, yes, this happened, this war happened. This person started it, was the first person to start it, whatever. There is a truth to that. Why do we want to like change it up, even in our personal lives? It's like you get an argument with someone. There is someone that started that argument. There's a
it,
reason for that argument, but we always want to be like, nope, it was you. Nope, it was me. No, it was you.
here's the thing. Does it matter then who started it?
No, it doesn't, but that's the truth, right? And it's like,
Right.
yeah, I feel like when we're not able to acknowledge the truth is where that disagreement and backlash comes from.
But so in that, I mean, I think another way is like, okay, one of us started this. We know that that's true. One of us started this. We can dwell on who started it, or we can talk about how do we understand one another so we can resolve it. So there's that, and so I think like, how much effort do we spend on trying to be, you're right here or you're wrong and I was right. And that's where I actually think that there's a lot of, going back to why people are so resistant to asking questions in the workplace. There's so much fear of offending and of being wrong. I mean, I remember once I led a whole this workshop for a group of leaders, and one woman at the end, she said, "You've taught us how to ask questions. I want to know how to answer questions." And it's like, I can't tell you that, because that is the question of leadership, right? Like, I can't tell you how to answer the question. Like, you have to decide how to answer the question. And whatever we answer is a risk. It's a risk. Like, so someone's going to not like it and someone's going to like it. And actually, Nima, something for me that I've decided is, if I'm not getting people who disagree with me, who don't like what I do, then I'm probably not pushing enough.
Yeah, so true. So true. You help people practice curiosity. Where do you see the biggest disconnect between teams is?
I think that it's, do people feel safe to practice curiosity? Is because it's is this a team that thinks there are right or wrong answers? And it's all about debating to get to that. Or is it actually, hey, we're having this discussion so we can learn different perspectives. And this is maybe the right thing to do right now, versus like, it is always right and that person's always right. And so I actually think of people's comfort with asking questions as an indicator of psychological safety. Do they feel safe to ask questions? And you can see in some places, some teams, they do not. And I think one of the biggest disconnects is when you've got leaders saying one thing and doing another. I remember working with one team where they said, in the 7 forms of respect, they said, candor is important to us. Candor is definitely important to us. And the leader's like, I'm all about candor. And so I said, great. So now what we're going to do in the next exercise is we are going to practice candor, and you will be assigned people to give feedback to you publicly. Right. And we told them who they were going to be assigned to beforehand, so they had time to prepare. The CEO could not do it, could not give constructive feedback. And then later on told me half my team is angry because they had to do this. It was like, and here you said that this is important to you, and yet you also have to be willing to put in the work to do it. And that's, I think, a disconnect is what people say and what they do, and also being willing to put the work in to do it, because it does take practice and it takes accountability. It takes even like, hey, I don't think we were as direct as we could have been. And then this is what happened as a result of that.
Do you think we need to do a better job of, instead of hiring leaders based off their resume, hire them based off of who they are instead of experience?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely am a big fan of hiring for experience. I don't look at resumes.
You're saying you do hire experience?
I do. I hire, I hire actually learn-it-alls.
Because I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying people should not hire based off experience and hire based off of that individual and what they're bringing to the table.
Yeah. So I would say hiring, well, but so it depends on how we define experience here. Is it the experience that aligns with the work, or it's like, oh, you want this tech job and you worked at Costco? That's really interesting.
No,
that's a really interesting experience. But I'm just saying here, like, if they have interesting experiences, then yes. And if you think and if sometimes the challenge though is the people hiring are kind of lazy about making that translation.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, oh, I only want I'm looking for A, I want only A. And they can't go, oh wow, if you work at Costco in customer service, that means you know how to do this and this and this. Right. And so, but that takes work. So I like to hire people with really interesting experiences and people who also show an appetite for learning. I think of it as hire for learn-it-alls, not know-it-alls.
Yeah. It's funny because I saw it, I think there was an ad of one of these hiring AI, not LinkedIn, like Indeed or something, where the AI filters out the candidates based on what's on their CV. And I'm just like, that just kind of defeats the whole purpose for me, because you could have someone that's so curious and innovative and creative, and you just bump that person out because they didn't have 4 years of experience and they only had 2. Why?
Yeah.
But when I hear the word curiosity, I think of 2 words: innovation and passion. And let me tell you what I mean by that. I mean, we're all curious about something, right? And no matter who you are, and how we act on that curiosity depends on our passion. And depending on how passionate we are is how we're going to get innovative towards it or not. How do you get individual to tap into their curiosity to be able to captivate on it and have an impact on their curiosity?
Well, so I actually think so the way that you described curiosity is outward curiosity. It's this desire to learn something new. I actually think of curiosity as both inward and outward.
Okay.
And so going back to the practice of curiosity starts with self-awareness. So I have to get curious about myself and try to understand, why am I even thinking this, right? Why do we even care about this? And so tapping into people's, so let me back up. One of the reasons why I started this company was because I gotten my second real life PhD in organizational development, and I created a volunteer program, and it was bringing together tech, government, and community-based organizations. And they were in a 6-month cohort, and I ran 5 cohorts. And I saw some people did really well, and some people really struggled. And by the 3rd cohort, I identified curiosity. The people who really struggled were so outcomes focused. They're like, it has to look like this. Success looks like this. This is our plan. And the people who were doing really well were like, oh my gosh, look what I'm learning. I had no idea. This is so much fun. And in any given group, if you had a critical mass of people who were curious, it could uplift the morale of a group. And if you had more people who were not, it could actually take down the morale. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of bystanders. There are a lot of people who are waiting to be influenced. And so in terms of how do we encourage people's curiosity and encourage their passion, are other people enthusiastic for learning around them? Or are they, no, it has to look like this. And it can change we can actually shift the dynamics. If it kind of also going back, it's okay not to know. It's okay if what we thought it was going to look like isn't what it ended up being. And so I think that to get people to, sometimes even people feeling passionate about something, it's almost like they have to feel permission too. Am I allowed to? Do I, and this could be like, do I give myself permission to then get to that place of innovation?
When you meet with these companies, do you think they're doing a good job of trying to find out what their employees are curious about? It could be anything. Like, what are you curious about? Are you graphic designer outside of work? What's your curiosity? Or is that lacking? Do you see a lack of that?
I think that there is, I think that there's a whole range and it's, do employers, do leaders, managers want to understand who their employees are as people? And I think part of the problem is how to do that in a way that feels productive and not, for a lack of a better word, like woo-woo, or like, oh my gosh, I didn't come to work for therapy, right? I don't want to like pour out all my trauma here, right? And then that's on one end. And the other end is very superficial. Oh, this is what I did on the weekend, right? And it's like, but I'm only going to tell you, like, I'm going to be very safe here, right? And in both of these, it can feel kind of not work related, and yet work is personal. So there are ways to design conversations that feel that they actually help support work without being about work. And so your question was, do companies do this well? I think that I think a lot of companies are struggling because there's also such a pressure to get things done. And so one of the things I have to remind people is, and employers, is it doesn't take that much time if you do it well, right? It can be an hour, like a month. It could be 90 minutes, a quarter, but you do have to actually set aside time for them to do it. Otherwise, they're not going to feel permission to do it. One of the things we do when we do workshops with teams, at the end, one of the questions is like, how do we make this sticky? How do we continue the learning? And we say, okay, we have given you another partner. And in the next month, we want you to connect with this partner. Or, hey, we want you to connect with the people who you talk to in this session in the next month or 2 months. That's an assignment, which means we've given you permission to do that. And so a lot of times what employers, there's this, I don't want to tell them what to do, but at the same time, you have to give them permission to take that time. So I think a lot of employers some are worried about kind of intruding, and then the ones who are doing it well are just, no, we actually have to build in this time.
How did you see working from home impacting employees and employers? Because obviously, I think it drew up a huge disconnect between the two. And then now when you come back in the office, it's like, oh, who are you? Oh, like,
yeah.
What did you
there's
think?
definitely awkwardness coming back, right? And I think if we can all kind of accept like, oh yeah, it's kind of, we're out of practice. So one of the questions I like to pull in organizations is what causes misalignment around understanding what respect is. And then I give them a whole bunch of factors. And what's been interesting is consistently the lowest ranked is working remotely. And what is a bigger issue in terms of causing misalignment around respect is generational differences, departmental differences, lack of clarity from leadership, sometimes inconsistent use of technology tools. But consistently, what is the lowest ranked is working remotely. And what that tells me is that I think sometimes people use working remotely as an excuse. Like, if we were all together, everything would be perfect. No, it's just like now working remotely has made it really clear how bad miscommunication is. And because I think it just requires a different level of intention. So I don't buy into, because people are working remotely. I mean, it makes things harder. It does make things harder, but it's not the cause.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I agree with you. There's many people that go into work for a paycheck, and that's all they do. How do you spark that curiosity in that employee that just goes for the paycheck where their mindset changes from a paycheck into helping an organization succeed?
So I think that we've got to ask people what's in it for to make it okay to be, hey, it's okay for you to want something.
Yeah.
What do you want from this? I mean, yes, there's the paycheck, but what else do you want from this?
And that's the
So,
curiosity part of
yeah,
that employer trying to find that curiosity of the employee.
yeah, and um, so we help organizations try to be organizations that want to be learning organizations be even better at being learning organizations, because otherwise employees will feel like they are being extracted for their labor. Right? You go in, I'm only here to do a job. You pay me for this job. It's very transactional, right? You're not investing in me. You're only paying me for what I'm already good at, for the experiences that I already have, right? Which is the difference of if you hire people who are curious and learn it all, and they understand like, oh, you're hiring me for what you think I can learn, and you're going to help me learn, and I'm gonna in turn work really hard to learn this as soon as possible. Right. And so there's kind of this, oh, we are in, there's a win-win helping each other in this versus, no, I pay you for this and you do this. And so, I mean, and I think in, it's about having very clear conversations about, hey, it's okay to want something. I think of it actually as a Venn diagram. There's me me, the individual, what my career aspirations are. There's my department, then there's the team, or there's the organization. And what's that sweet spot in between? Because if we can find that, then, and we can focus our efforts on what's in that overlap of what motivates the team, the organization, and me personally, then we can get a lot done.
Yeah. Um, I feel like I already know the answer to this next question biasly that you're going to pick, but I'm going to ask it anyways. You wrote a book titled 7 Forms of Respect on Amazon, bestselling. If you haven't read it, you should go read it. If you had to pick one character trait for an individual to have, for you to interact with, respect or loyalty, a coworker, which one would you pick?
Well, respect. So,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
But why respect? And do you think their respect and loyalty are correlated?
Well, I mean, I actually think that loyalty is so just to define loyalty is just, hey, I'm loyal to you. I will stick with you.
Right.
And I think in the modern workplace, that is just unrealistic to expect that. I think it's more about, hey, how do we have the best time together, whatever time we have? I mean,
Why do you think that's unrealistic?
because just look at it used to be people would stay at one workplace for decades.
Mm-hmm.
We're hoping they'll stay for 18 months now, right?
But
Like
why is that? Do you know why?
I think it's, I mean, I think it's, well, I think that there are a lot of reasons. One is structural, that employers used to take care of their employees. There'd be these pension plans, right? There'd be like you are, and and I also think that people want change a lot more now too. So there's like with the employer, the structure of the employer, but there's also the desire for novelty from the employee. And so if the organization isn't constantly changing, then employees can get bored. And there's nothing the employer can do because it's like, well, we're doing our good work and we need to do this work. We can't just change up things for you. And so then it's up to the employee to say, well, I want to try new things. I want to try this. I want to try that. I want to learn new things. So, but with loyalty, I mean, actually, one of the things I always tell my team is you need to do what's best for you. And I will support you in that. And I just hope that we're open in our communication and just the time that we have together. Let's let that be the best time, and know that that doesn't mean it has to be forever.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Why is respect so hard to understand?
I think because people think that the way that I think about respect is the way that everyone thinks about respect. Right? Because and we talk about respect as if it's fixed and as if it's universal. Hey, Nima, like I need you to respect me, and Nima, you're like, I do respect you, Julie, and we go back and forth, and we haven't actually talked about what respect looks like. And because we can agree on what respect feels like, feeling seen, heard, appreciated, we disagree on what it looks like. And usually people don't actually get to that granular level, and they just assume. So, for example, punctuality is always something that's very controversial because I'll have an audience member say, well, I understand the other forms, but punctuality is a given. That's just respectful. I don't even understand how you can possibly say that is relative. And it's like, but it is. It is. I mean, when I lived in Vietnam, there were so many people who would cancel on me last minute. I was like, I don't understand. They must know. How could they cancel on me last minute? They must have known beforehand. And then I asked a Vietnamese friend, and he said, oh, yeah, they know. And the reason why they canceled last minute is so that it would convey the sense of emergency. Because if they told you beforehand, that means they made a choice, and the choice was not to be with you. And I was like, so they're trying to be respectful? I was like, yes. Oh. And so the thing is, we assume the reasons for why people do what they do because we can't possibly imagine any other reason. And yet it's not until we have the conversation, we're like, whoa, that was your logic? I mean, Nima, earlier you said, why don't people have logic? People do have logic. They have different logic. We all have our own logic.
That's so interesting to me. Like psychology is such an interesting thing. Like the way people think and behave. We all behave and think so differently. And it's like, I don't know. I feel like you don't think there's one logic. Like there's no one logical way of looking at it. Like you being late is disrespectful. You don't think that's actually a logical thing?
I think someone else could, and I'm just going to play devil's advocate here because punctuality is very important to me, but I'm play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
You need to understand that I have these other things going on in my life.
But then why would you plan something or have it? But you had the meeting and then you plan something. I'm going to play devil's advocate with you. But being late is disrespectful. And it might not be okay. Now I'm playing devil's advocate.
So, I mean, and actually, I think that there's a difference between disrespect and lack of respect. Disrespect is intentional. Lack of respect is I didn't know that mattered to you. So a lot of times, think about it. People are late, and you know what other people say? Usually, not a big deal. It's okay. So we actually say it's okay. That's what we say, right? How often you say like, yeah, that was a problem that you were late.
Yeah, I'm very straightforward with people. I will tell them.
But like, how many meetings have you been in where someone comes in?
Oh yeah, no meetings. No, yeah.
Yeah, like, oh, it's it's just like, I'm sorry, I'm late. Like, I mean, I've gotten to a point of thank you for thank you for your apology.
Yeah,
which is different from that's okay.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Respect is so subjective. Do you think how we perceive respect and define respect can be related to how we were raised and then the environment we grew up in?
Absolutely. I think that's a huge part of it. And I think it's something that many people don't even realize.
Yeah.
And this kind of goes back to the self-awareness part. I remember being in facilitating a workshop, and one of my favorite starter questions is, who in your life, what experiences have influenced how you think about respect? And this is just, and people will talk about family, and usually we'll give them like 5 or 10 minutes. So it's not much time. And so usually they're at the family, and sometimes they talk about coworkers or friends. And in hearing each other's stories, it's like, whoa, you went through that? Well, I had a different experience. And so it's not until we ask ourselves that, because a lot of people don't ever ask themselves that. It's just, it is the way it is. And so I remember one person said, oh, because he was very much of a contrarian, but he realized it's because he grew up without a steady family structure. He was in foster care homes. And then he talked to someone who had a really different experience. And so he was able to understand, how my upbringing influences how I see rules, and I don't like them. Right. And so, and it's not until we can start kind of reflecting on that we can understand the connection. And then once we understand the connection, we can explain to other people. And if we can explain to other people, then they're going to remember the story. So for me, punctuality is really important to me because growing up, my mom was always late picking me up from school. And, someone else could have that exact same experience and say, what's the big deal? My mom was late. Not a big deal. We can have the same experience and different reactions. So we can't assume that we interpret the same experience the same, right? But in any case, when I tell people that story, they understand, Julie's not feeling, it's not because Julie's rigid. It's because there's this the story, this experience that's influenced how I think about time, and literally I feel anxious.
Do you think that there's different time blocks in one's life, like from 18, 25, 40, that where we're able to make that shift in our minds? Like, have you experienced that where, you know what I mean? Like, I feel
I
like
haven't looked at it with I definitely think how we think about things evolve. I haven't thought about it in terms of time blocks. I'm sure that's a child or a child psychologist that can do that. But I think it's more experiences.
yeah, yeah,
Mhm,
it might be experience because I look at it myself, like the way my viewpoints at 18 changed dramatically at 25.
mhm,
And at 25, I'm at 33 now. I still see a little bit like shift there. Like I'm able to be more open of understanding other people's perspective
mhm,
and being respectful
mhm,
and being able to see people from their point of view. When at 18, I wasn't really thinking like that.
mhm. Well, and so usually 18 is when a lot of people move out of the home, right? But if you didn't move
Yeah,
out of the home until you're 40, then
yeah,
maybe the shift happens then, right?
yeah.
Or so, I think it is kind of to look at, oh, what were these important turning points in our life?
You've lived in the UK, you lived in France, and you lived in Germany, correct? Are there any specific cultural groups of people that you have found are easier to make them feel respected versus others?
No, I mean, and I in general also, I again, like I'm not going to centralize, right? But I do know that there are differences, and also all these differences that are like kind of layered on top of each other, right? Like when I was, I mean, usually when I lived abroad, I was hanging out with other expats, and so so interacting with locals was because I mean, my French is not very good, my German's even worse, right? So, um, uh there's a and I think that there's also there are certain cultures that will tell you when you did something wrong, and then there are certain cultures that won't, but they feel it. Um,
But do you know what? Like, do you have
so,
an
like,
example of?
I think, like, Japan, they're not gonna tell you that you were rude, but, like, they'll know. You'll you did something, but they're not gonna point it out that you did it, but it's noticed.
Yeah.
So, people
I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to ask you one last question. What are you curious about
oh gosh,
today?
yeah. I, I'm just constantly I love surprising myself. I love like, wow, I just had an assumption there. I mean, even Nima, it wasn't until I listened to your podcast. I assumed Nima was a female name.
Yeah,
Right. And so I turn on your podcast. I'm like, oh, why did I have that assumption? Right. And just
yeah.
like all of these things that, so yes, there's the uh, inward curiosity, just that's the fact that I can surprise myself and just being around people who just teach me about their cultures and let me ask questions. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So one last question. We're gonna end on this. If I go back to high school, let's go back to college, high
Sure.
school, and I speak to your best friend or your favorite teacher, and I'm like, "Who was Julie?" What would they say?
I think that they would say that I was very driven, that I was very, very intense and very driven. I think I was probably way more intense back then than I am now. So,
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna leave the last words to you. Is there anything you want to promote, or any a website or anything like that? The floor is yours.
yeah. So please do check out the book, Seven Forms of Respect. You can get it at Amazon and all the other booksellers. Go to formsofrespect.com. We have a free mini book, free quiz, free digital, like mini digital course. And go to curiositybase.com so you can find out more about our services. We would love to help your teams practice curiosity. I'm very active on LinkedIn and also very active on YouTube. So please find me there.
Awesome. And I'm gonna leave the links to the book and all the links that Dr. Pham mentioned below. Dr. Pham, thank you so much for joining me, and everybody, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, this is the LeaderSeat Podcast.